Two pilots fight for their lives while 198 souls scream behind them. The aircraft is disintegrating at 20,000 feet. Control is gone. Hope is gone. They're seconds from total failure. Until she walks into the cockpit, calm, confident, impossibly composed. She speaks into the radio, call sign Viper. The F-35 pilots hear it and freeze. That call sign. That legend. It can't be her. But it is. The fighter pilots' voices change instantly, respectful, honored, ready to follow. Who is this woman? And what did she do to earn a name that makes warriors bow? Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The Boeing 737 cruised smoothly at 20,000 feet, engines humming their steady reassurance as 200 souls relaxed into the mundane rhythm of commercial flight. Captain Sarah Mitchell had logged 18,000 hours in her career, and this routine Los Angeles to Denver run represented the kind of flying that let experienced pilots think about dinner plans and weekend golf while autopilot systems handled the predictable sky. First Officer David Chen monitored instruments with the casual competence of someone who'd made this exact flight hundreds of times, his hands resting lightly on controls that required nothing more than occasional adjustment to maintain their assigned altitude and heading. In seat 23C, a woman in her late 30s sat with a paperback novel open on her lap, her casual jeans and navy sweater marking her as just another passenger among the 198 people filling the cabin. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face carried the kind of unremarkable prettiness that disappeared in crowds. She'd boarded with a small carry-on bag, taken her middle seat without complaint, and exchanged polite smiles with the businessman beside her and the college student at the window. Nothing about her suggested anything beyond ordinary civilian existence, a consultant perhaps, or a marketing manager, someone whose biggest concern might be making her connecting flight or whether her hotel room would have decent Wi-Fi. The first indication that routine had shattered came as a sound like a massive sledgehammer striking the fuselage, a metallic crack so violent it seemed to compress the air inside the cabin. The aircraft lurched sideways with such force that overhead bins burst open, spilling luggage into the aisle as passengers screamed. The woman in 23C's hands moved instantly to grip her armrests, her body automatically bracing with practiced precision as her eyes tracked the aircraft's violent motion with analytical focus that didn't match civilian panic. In the cockpit, Captain Mitchell's world exploded into chaos as every alarm simultaneously screamed for attention. The control yoke jerked in her hands like something alive trying to escape her grip, fighting her with forces that required both hands and full strength just to maintain marginal control. "What the hell," she started, but her words cut off as the aircraft rolled hard right, systems failing in cascading sequence that turned orderly instrument panels into Christmas displays of red warnings and emergency indicators. "Explosive decompression." Chen shouted over the howling wind suddenly tearing through the cockpit. His hands flew across emergency checklists even as he struggled to process the impossible array of failures confronting them. The cabin pressure had dropped catastrophically, oxygen masks deployed throughout the aircraft with that distinctive popping sound that represents every pilot's nightmare scenario. But this wasn't the manageable emergency they'd trained for, this was structural failure spreading through multiple systems simultaneously. Mitchell grabbed for her oxygen mask with one hand while fighting the controls with the other, her breathing already labored as the thin air at 20,000 feet made every movement feel like running a marathon. The mask provided oxygen, but the effort required to keep the aircraft from entering an uncontrolled dive was consuming energy faster than her body could replenish it. Declaring emergency, she managed through gasping breaths. "We've got major structural damage, multiple system failures, losing hydraulics." The aircraft shuddered again, a grinding vibration that resonated through the entire airframe with a frequency that suggested metal tearing somewhere behind them. Chen pulled up damaged schematics, but the displays showed failures spreading like infection through systems that should have been independent, electrical buses dying, hydraulic pressure dropping in all three systems simultaneously, flight controls responding with sickening delays that made every correction feel like fighting through mud. "We're losing control authority," Chen reported, his voice tight with the professional calm that covers absolute terror. His own oxygen mask made his words muffled, but the strain was audible. "Captain, the flight controls are barely responding. I'm showing structural damage to the empennage, possible tail strike or explosion. We've got warning lights I've never seen before." Mitchell's vision was starting to narrow around the edges despite the oxygen flowing into her mask. The violent aircraft movements had thrown her against her restraints hard enough that pain blazed across her ribs and shoulder, injuries that would have demanded immediate attention on the ground but which she had to ignore while fighting to keep 200 people from falling out of the sky. Her hands ached from gripping controls that bucked and jerked with such violence she could feel tendons straining. "We need to get down," she said through gritted teeth. "Emergency descent, but we can't do it too fast or we'll tear what's left of this aircraft apart. David, I need you to coordinate emergency services at the nearest airport while I focus on keeping us in the air." But Chen was struggling with his own crisis. The violent decompression had thrown debris from somewhere in the cockpit into his face, and blood ran from a gash above his eye that he kept wiping away even as he tried to read instruments through vision that wouldn't focus properly. His hands shook as he reached for the radio, the combination of oxygen deprivation, injury, and sheer terror making simple movements feel impossibly complex. In the cabin, the woman in 23C remained remarkably still amid the pandemonium. Passengers around her were screaming, crying, gripping armrests with white-knuckled terror as the aircraft continued its violent shaking and the oxygen masks dangled before faces frozen in fear. Flight attendants fought their way through the tilted aisle, their own oxygen masks in place as they tried to provide reassurance that their frightened eyes contradicted. She watched them with assessment that was pure tactical analysis. The aircraft's movements told her experienced hands that this wasn't a managed emergency descent, this was barely controlled flight by pilots fighting to maintain any control at all. The shuddering suggested structural damage severe enough that every second airborne increased risk of catastrophic failure. The angle of descent was too shallow, which meant the pilots couldn't risk the standard emergency descent profile, which in turn meant damage so severe that normal procedures would tear the aircraft apart. Her name was Colonel Rebecca Viper Thornton, though no one on this commercial flight knew that. The casual civilian clothes concealed a career that had taken her through fighter training at the top of her class, through combat deployments where she'd logged 200 missions over hostile territory, through situations where she'd flown aircraft so damaged that engineering analysis later concluded survival should have been impossible. Her call sign, Viper, had been earned the hard way, through a combat engagement where she'd taken on 4 enemy fighters alone when her wingman was hit, protecting him through 15 minutes of aerial combat while flying with battle damage that should have sent her aircraft into the ground. She'd brought both of them home, and the way she'd struck with precision and lethality while protecting her wounded wingman had earned her a call sign that became legend throughout military aviation communities worldwide. She'd left active duty 6 months ago, exhausted by the weight of command, by the losses that accumulated across years of combat, by the burden of being held up as an example when she felt like a collection of survival instincts that had somehow stayed lucky longer than statistics suggested possible. She'd taken consulting work with defense contractors, work that let her use her expertise without putting her in cockpits where every decision meant someone might die. She'd deliberately chosen anonymity, letting her uniform and her call sign stay locked in the past where the weight of them couldn't follow her into civilian life. But training burned into muscle memory through thousands of hours doesn't disappear just because someone changes clothes. Her eyes tracked the flight attendants' expressions and saw the specific kind of fear that comes when professionals realize they're beyond their training. She listened to the aircraft's sounds, the rhythms of the struggling engines, the particular timbre of structural stress, the way the airframe vibrated, and her mind automatically constructed technical analysis that told her this aircraft was on the edge of coming apart. The captain's voice came over the intercom, strained and breathless in a way that made passengers around Rebecca gasp with renewed fear. "This is Captain Mitchell. We have experienced severe structural damage and are conducting emergency descent. I need everyone to remain in their seats with seatbelts fastened and oxygen masks in place. We are doing everything we can, but this is an extremely serious situation. Flight attendants, prepare for possible emergency landing." What the captain didn't say but what Rebecca heard in her gasping breaths and careful word choices was more terrifying than what she did say. The pilots were fighting for their own survival while trying to save everyone else. They were injured or oxygen-deprived or both, struggling to maintain consciousness and control while managing an emergency that exceeded anything commercial aviation training anticipated. Rebecca made her decision with the same cold tactical clarity that had kept her alive through combat that killed others. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, ignoring the businessman beside her grabbing at her arm, ignoring the flight attendant shouting for her to sit down. She moved forward through the tilted aisle with the balanced grace of someone accustomed to moving in unstable aircraft, one hand steadying herself against seat backs while her body automatically compensated for the aircraft's violent movements. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat." The senior flight attendant blocked her path, this woman in her 50s whose name tag read, Jennifer, and whose eyes were wide with barely controlled fear. "I'm a pilot," Rebecca said quietly, her voice carrying absolute authority that made the flight attendant blink. "Military, combat experienced, thousands of hours including in damaged aircraft. Your pilots are in trouble and I can help. Let me through." Jennifer stared at her for one suspended moment, professional training warring with the desperate hope that someone, anyone, might be able to help in a situation that had clearly exceeded every procedure she knew. She stepped aside. The cockpit door was already open, protocol during emergencies, and Rebecca stepped through to find a scene that combined technical nightmare with human suffering in ways that made even her extensive combat experience catch in her chest. Captain Mitchell was fighting the controls with both hands, her face gray beneath her oxygen mask, movements showing the particular kind of desperation that comes when trained responses aren't working and improvisation is the only option left. Blood soaked through her uniform shirt from somewhere under her shoulder harness, injuries from the violent decompression that she was ignoring through sheer will. First Officer Chen was worse. He'd managed to don his oxygen mask but blood from his head wound had saturated the straps, and he was blinking constantly trying to clear vision that obviously wasn't focusing properly. His hands moved across instruments with the slow deliberation of someone fighting to maintain consciousness, each action requiring concentration that should have been automatic. "Who the hell?" Mitchell started, her voice sharp with the stress of managing impossible crisis. "Colonel Rebecca Thornton, call sign Viper, 15 years fighter aviation including combat operations," Rebecca said with the rapid-fire precision of military check-in. "I have experience flying damaged aircraft, managing injuries during flight operations, and emergency procedures under combat conditions. Your first officer is seriously injured and you're fighting this aircraft alone while trying to coordinate emergency response. Let me help." Mitchell's eyes met hers for one suspended second, and what passed between them was the instant recognition of one pilot to another when technical expertise becomes the only language that matters. "Can you handle radio coordination? I need to focus completely on flying and David needs medical attention he's not going to get until we're on the ground. Every minute I take my attention off these controls we get closer to losing it completely." "Roger that." Rebecca slipped into the jump seat behind Chen, her hands already reaching for the radio controls with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd coordinated combat operations from damaged aircraft while taking fire. She keyed the emergency frequency. "Denver Center, this is United 2847, we have military aviator call sign Viper now coordinating emergency response. Requesting immediate emergency services at nearest suitable airport, requesting military support coordination, and requesting priority handling for aircraft with severe structural damage, injured pilots, and limited control authority." "How copy?" The air traffic controller's voice came back with the particular kind of carefully maintained calm that covers shock. "United 2847, Denver Center copies. We're showing you descending through 18,000 feet. Nearest suitable airport is Colorado Springs Municipal, distance 40 miles. Emergency services are rolling. Stand by for," "Wait, did you say call sign Viper?" Rebecca's hands were already moving across the aircraft system's displays, her tactical mind assessing damage patterns with the same analytical process she'd used to evaluate battle damage in combat. "Affirmative, Denver Center, call sign Viper. I am providing coordination support for injured pilots. I need tactical communication with military assets if available, this aircraft needs escort and potential air support coordination. Behind her, Mitchell fought the controls through another violent shudder, her breathing audible through the oxygen mask as gasps that suggested she was reaching the end of her physical endurance. The hydraulics are going, she managed. We're about to lose what little control authority we have left. Rebecca, I need options because I'm running out of ideas. Rebecca's mind went into the mode that had saved her life dozens of times, tactical assessment under fire, where instinct and training merged into something faster than conscious thought. She pulled up the aircraft system's displays and saw the cascading failures spreading through multiple redundant systems that should have been independent. The damage pattern suggested explosive structural failure that had sent debris through critical areas, severing connections and destroying backups simultaneously. How much manual control do you have left? She asked Mitchell, her voice carrying the tactical calm that made people trust her assessments even when they suggested impossible things. Barely anything. I'm using trim and throttles to maintain attitude, but I can't make precise corrections anymore. It's like trying to steer a car by leaning. Rebecca processed that against terrain displays, weather data, and performance calculations that ran automatically through a mind trained to assess tactical situations under pressure. Okay, here's what we're going to do. You maintain current descent rate and heading. Don't try to correct for anything except immediate threats to flight stability. I'm going to coordinate a straight-in approach to Colorado Springs with emergency services positioned for rough landing. We'll treat this like a controlled crash rather than a landing. You focus exclusively on maintaining minimal control, I'll handle everything else. She keyed the radio again. Denver Center, Viper. We need military coordination now. Is there any tactical air support in the area that can provide escort and assessment? United 2847, affirmative. We have a pair of F-35 Lightning IIs from Buckley Air Force Base that were conducting training operations. They're being vectored to your position now. Estimating contact in 3 minutes. Behind Rebecca, Mitchell let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. F-35s. Jesus. This really is bad enough for fighter escort. It's good news, Rebecca said, her hands already pulling up tactical frequencies. Those pilots will understand combat damage assessment and can provide information about your aircraft's condition you can't see from inside. Chen, how are you doing? The first officer had slumped in his seat, his head back against the headrest while he fought to maintain consciousness. Vision's blurry, he managed. Everything's spinning. I think I have a concussion. I'm sorry, Captain, I'm trying to help but I can't focus on the instruments anymore. Don't apologize, Rebecca said firmly. You maintained your station through explosive decompression and kept this aircraft flying while injured. That's more than most people could do. Just stay conscious and keep breathing. We're going to get you on the ground. The radio crackled. United 2847, this is Raptor Flight, 2 F-35s at your 6 o'clock, ascending to your altitude. We have you visual. Stand by for damage assessment. Rebecca keyed the tactical frequency with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd spent years coordinating with fighter support. Raptor Flight, this is Viper coordinating for United 2847. We have major structural damage, hydraulic failures, injured pilots, and minimal control authority. Request visual assessment of damage to empennage and control surfaces, and request tactical support for emergency approach Colorado Springs Municipal. There was a pause on the radio, longer than professional communications should allow. When the voice came back it carried an edge of something between shock and awe. Say again, Viper. Did you say your call sign is Viper? Affirmative, Raptor Flight, call sign Viper. Now can we focus on the aircraft that's barely staying in the sky? Roger that, Viper. The pilot's voice had shifted to something different, the particular respect military pilots reserved for legends they'd heard about but never expected to meet. Raptor 1 moving in for visual assessment. We'll coordinate tactical support. Viper, it's an honor. Rebecca didn't respond to that, her focus on the system's displays where more warning lights were illuminating as the aircraft continued its deterioration through the sky. She could hear Mitchell's breathing becoming more labored, could see the captain's hands shaking on controls that barely responded. They were running out of time measured in minutes, and every one of those minutes depended on keeping Mitchell conscious and functional enough to maintain the minimal control that kept 200 people alive. "Captain, I need you to tell me your physical status," Rebecca said, using the direct tactical communication that cut through emergencies. "Don't minimize. Are you injured beyond what you can function through?" Mitchell's response came through gritted teeth. "I think I have broken ribs from the harness impact during the decompression. Every breath hurts and I'm getting dizzy, but I don't know if that's from injury or oxygen deprivation or just exhaustion. My shoulder is either dislocated or badly strained. I can't maintain this level of physical effort much longer." United 2847, Raptor 1. "I have visual on your damage." The F-35 pilot's voice had gone professionally neutral in the way that meant the news wasn't good. "You have major structural damage to your vertical stabilizer, looks like approximately 30% of the upper section is missing. Your left horizontal stabilizer is damaged with visible tearing along the leading edge. I'm seeing hydraulic fluid streaming from multiple locations. Viper, you're holding together an aircraft that shouldn't still be flying." Rebecca processed that against Mitchell's diminishing physical capability and the distance remaining to Colorado Springs. The math was brutal: they might make it, or they might experience catastrophic structural failure before reaching the airport. The difference would come down to whether Mitchell could maintain control through conditions that would challenge healthy pilots in undamaged aircraft. Raptor Flight, Viper. I need you to coordinate with Colorado Springs for emergency services positioned for wide pattern emergency landing. We can't do standard approaches with this control situation. We need crash equipment, fire suppression, medical teams for injured pilots and potential passenger casualties. Also request that you maintain visual escort through final approach. I may need tactical assessment information that our instruments can't provide. Roger, Viper. Raptor Flight will coordinate tactical support through final approach. Viper, if you don't mind me asking, are you the Viper, the one from the combat engagement over hostile territory in 2017? Rebecca's hands paused fractionally on the controls before continuing their work. That engagement had been classified for years but had eventually become legend throughout fighter communities, the mission where she protected her wounded wingmen against impossible odds, where she'd flown her own damaged aircraft through 15 minutes of combat that analysts later said should have killed her 6 times over, where she'd earned her call sign through precision strikes that had been described as Viper fast and absolutely lethal. It was the mission that had made her call sign synonymous with tactical excellence and unbreakable determination under fire. Affirmative, Raptor 1. Same Viper. Can we maintain focus on the current emergency? Absolutely, ma'am. Raptor Flight is honored to provide support. Colorado Springs is being coordinated for emergency operations. You've got everything you need on the ground. Mitchell's voice cut through, weaker now. Rebecca, I'm losing it. My vision is tunneling and my hands are going numb. I don't think I can hold this much longer. Rebecca made instant tactical assessment. They were 15 miles from Colorado Springs, descending through 12,000 feet, with a pilot whose physical collapse was imminent and an aircraft whose structural integrity was degrading with every second. She needed to get Mitchell focused on the one task she could still perform while taking over everything else. Sarah, listen to me. She used the captain's first name deliberately, creating the personal connection that could cut through physical deterioration. You don't have to do anything except keep your hands on those controls and maintain minimal stability. Don't think about approach, don't think about landing, don't even think about navigation. Just feel the aircraft and keep it stable. I'm going to handle everything else. Can you do that? I can try. That's all I need. Raptor Flight, Viper. We're going to need fighter escort through final approach with continuous tactical assessment. Our pilot is at the edge of physical capability and I'll be coordinating approach from the jump seat while she focuses exclusively on maintaining control. This is going to be unconventional, but it's what we've got. Understood, Viper. Raptor flight will maintain escort and provide continuous assessment. You call it, we support it. Rebecca pulled up the approach charts for Colorado Springs while simultaneously monitoring aircraft systems that continued their deterioration. She was coordinating 3 simultaneous crises, keeping Mitchell conscious and functional, managing an aircraft whose control systems were on the edge of complete failure, and setting up an emergency landing that would require precision they barely had capacity to achieve. Denver Center, Viper. Request direct approach Colorado Springs runway 35 right, no delays, no holding. We need emergency vehicles positioned along entire runway length and overrun areas. Be advised we have minimal control authority and landing may exceed normal parameters. United 2847, Denver Center copies. You're cleared direct Colorado Springs, descend and maintain 8,000 feet, expect straight in approach runway 35 right. Emergency services are in position. Viper, they're ready for you. Rebecca guided Mitchell through the descent with continuous tactical updates that focused the captain's deteriorating awareness on immediate actions rather than overall emergency. Sarah, reduce throttle 5%. Good. Now slight left trim adjustment. Good. You're doing exactly what we need. Raptor flight, how's our structural situation? Viper, Raptor 1. Your damage is stable for now, but I'm seeing flex in your tail section that concerns me. Any turbulence or sharp maneuvers could trigger catastrophic failure. You need smooth air and minimal corrections. Copy that. Sarah, we're going to grease this approach with minimal control inputs. Small corrections only, nothing abrupt. Let the aircraft settle into stable descent and just guide it gently. You've got this. Mitchell's response was barely audible. I can't feel my hands anymore. I'm just trying to keep my arms in position. Behind them, Chen had slipped into semi-consciousness, his head lolling despite his efforts to stay alert. The cockpit had become a space where 3 people were managing crisis through the last reserves of physical and mental endurance, held together by Rebecca's tactical coordination and Mitchell's stubborn refusal to let go of controls that represented the only thing keeping 200 people alive. Colorado Springs Tower, Viper coordinating for United 2847. We're on final approach with injured pilots and minimal control authority. Request all traffic cleared and emergency services standing by. We're coming in hot and rough. United 2847, Colorado Springs Tower. Runway is yours, all traffic cleared, emergency services positioned. Wind is calm, weather is clear. You're cleared to land runway 35 right. Rebecca watched the runway appear through the windscreen, that reassuring concrete strip that represented salvation if they could just reach it before Mitchell's strength gave out completely or the aircraft's structure finally failed. She provided continuous tactical coordination to Mitchell, breaking the approach into individual seconds rather than overall task. Sarah, we're at 500 feet. Maintain current descent rate. Raptor flight, give me assessment. Viper, Raptor 1. Your approach is stable. Structural damage is holding. You're looking good for landing. Sarah, at 200 feet. Throttle back slightly. Let the aircraft settle. Don't fight it, just guide it. You're doing perfect. Mitchell's hands moved on the controls with the kind of determination that transcended physical capability, her entire being focused on the one task Rebecca had given her. The aircraft descended through the final 100 feet with the rough grace of something barely controlled, its damaged structure protesting with sounds that suggested imminent failure. 50 feet. Hold your attitude. Let it come down. Almost there. The main gear touched first with impact that sent shudders through the entire airframe, harder than any normal landing but controlled enough that the structure held together. The nose gear followed seconds later, and then they were on the runway with Mitchell applying brakes that barely functioned while Rebecca managed the throttles and coordinated with Tower. We're down. We're down. Rebecca's voice carried triumph that years of combat experience hadn't diminished. Sarah, you did it. You brought them home. The aircraft rolled to a stop on the runway surrounded by emergency vehicles whose flashing lights created strobing illumination through the cockpit windows. Mitchell's hands finally released the controls and she slumped in her seat, her breathing harsh through the oxygen mask. I couldn't have done it without you, she managed. I was losing it completely. You saved us. Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft, their procedures efficient as they deployed slides and began evacuating passengers while medical teams rushed toward the cockpit. Rebecca helped Mitchell from her seat, supporting the captain whose legs barely held her weight. Paramedics moved in immediately, their professional assessment quickly identifying injuries that would require hospital treatment but which Mitchell had ignored while keeping 200 people alive. The first officer needs immediate attention, Rebecca told the medical team leader. Probable concussion, significant blood loss, potential other injuries from head trauma. The captain has broken ribs, shoulder injury, possible internal injuries from harness impact. Outside, passengers were sliding down emergency chutes onto tarmac where emergency personnel guided them away from the aircraft. Rebecca could see their faces, shock, relief, tears, the particular emotional release that comes when death has been narrowly avoided. Flight attendants were helping elderly passengers and children, their own faces showing the strain of managing crisis that had exceeded anything training suggested possible. "Ma'am, we need to check you out too," a paramedic said to Rebecca, noting the way she moved with the stiffness of someone who'd been bracing against violent forces. "I'm fine. Focus on the pilots. They're the heroes here." But the paramedic was looking at her with an expression that suggested rumors were already spreading among the emergency crews. "You're the military pilot who coordinated the emergency landing. The one with the call sign Viper." Rebecca felt the weight of that name settling around her again, the identity she tried to leave behind reasserting itself through crisis that had demanded every skill combat had burned into her. "I just helped coordinate. The captain is who kept this aircraft flying. Make sure she knows that." The F-35s made a low pass over the airport, the thunder of their engines a salute that made everyone on the ground look up. Over the radio frequency still connected to Rebecca's headset, she heard the Raptor flight leader's voice. "Viper, Raptor flight. It was an honor flying with a legend. Fair winds and following seas, ma'am." She stood on the tarmac watching emergency crews continue their work, feeling the familiar mix of exhaustion and relief that follows survival of crisis that should have killed everyone involved. Around her, passengers were being triaged and transported, their survival a testament to Mitchell's determination and Chen's courage and the particular combination of circumstance that had put someone with Rebecca's experience in position to help when help was desperately needed. A news crew was setting up their equipment beyond the emergency perimeter, their cameras already filming the damaged aircraft whose tail section showed the catastrophic structural damage that had nearly torn it apart at 20,000 feet. Rebecca recognized the moment when her anonymity ended, when the story of Viper coordinating emergency response from civilian passenger seat reached media hungry for hero narratives. Mitchell was being loaded onto a stretcher but she caught Rebecca's eye and managed a smile. "Thank you for not staying in your seat. You're right, I was losing it completely. Without you, we'd all be dead. You kept flying when most pilots would have given up," Rebecca replied. "You did what I could never have done from the jump seat. We're all here because you refused to quit even when your body wanted to." "Who are you really?" Mitchell asked. "I mean, I know your call sign is Viper, but what does that mean? The F-35 pilots treated you like royalty." Rebecca hesitated, then decided the truth was simpler than evasion. "I'm a retired combat pilot. I had a career where I saw things and did things that prepared me for situations like this. My call sign represents missions I'd rather not talk about, but which apparently still follow me even after I take off the uniform." Later, after she'd given statements to investigators and declined interview requests from reporters and finally convinced medical personnel that her bruises didn't require hospitalization, Rebecca sat in an airport conference room with officials from the airline, the FAA, and a military liaison who'd arrived to coordinate with someone whose call sign carried weight even with senior officers. Colonel Thornton, the FAA investigator began, his tone respectful but curious. Your intervention during this emergency was remarkable. The pilots both credit you with saving their lives and the lives of all 198 passengers. But I need to understand your assessment of the situation. What made you decide to enter the cockpit? Rebecca chose her words carefully. I heard the captain's voice on the intercom and recognized the particular stress patterns that indicate someone fighting through physical injury or oxygen deprivation. As a military pilot with combat experience including flying damaged aircraft while injured, I had relevant expertise. The decision to offer assistance was tactical assessment that the situation exceeded commercial emergency protocols. Your military record is impressive, the military liaison said, this Air Force colonel whose own decoration suggested combat experience. Your call sign Viper is known throughout fighter communities. When the F-35 pilots reported coordinating with you, it created significant interest at the command level. We'd like to discuss whether you'd be willing to provide consultation on civilian emergency procedures incorporating military tactical approaches. I left active duty to get away from making life-and-death decisions, Rebecca said quietly. Today reminded me why I'm good at it and why it costs so much to be good at it. I'll consider consultation work if it helps people, but I'm not coming back to uniform. The airline representative cleared her throat. Ms. Thornton, United Airlines would like to express our profound gratitude for your actions. You saved one of our crews and 198 passengers. We'd like to discuss recognition and compensation for your extraordinary assistance. I don't need recognition or compensation. I need you to improve your emergency procedures to account for pilot incapacitation. Today worked because I happened to be on that aircraft with relevant experience. Next time, you might not be lucky enough to have someone like me in seat 23C. Train for the possibility that your pilots might be fighting for their own survival while trying to save passengers. That's what would actually honor what happened today. In the following days, the story spread through aviation communities with the speed of legend. Viper had been on a commercial flight that experienced catastrophic emergency, had coordinated the response while injured pilots fought to maintain control, had brought everyone safely home through tactical expertise that exceeded civilian emergency protocols. The F-35 pilots told their story of coordinating with someone whose call sign they'd studied in tactical analysis courses, whose combat record represented achievements most pilots never approached. Mitchell and Chen, recovering from their injuries in the hospital, gave interviews praising the mysterious passenger whose calm authority had provided coordination that saved everyone aboard. Passengers gradually learned that the woman who'd seemed so composed during their terror had been someone whose call sign commanded respect from the world's most elite aviators. Rebecca watched the coverage from her apartment, uncomfortable with the attention but recognizing that some stories couldn't stay hidden once survival depended on revealing them. She'd spent 6 months trying to leave Viper behind, trying to become just Rebecca Thornton who consulted on technical matters and didn't carry the weight of combat decisions anymore. But crisis had found her at 20,000 feet, and the skills that combat had burned into her had proved essential when commercial training became inadequate. She'd saved 200 people not through heroic individual action but through tactical coordination that allowed injured pilots to focus on their survival while she handled everything else. She'd done what her training and experience prepared her to do, and somehow that felt both inevitable and exhausting. The call sign Viper had followed her back into the world, carried by F-35 pilots whose respect transformed anonymous passenger into revealed legend. She couldn't hide from it anymore, couldn't pretend that her combat experience was irrelevant to civilian life, couldn't avoid the weight of being someone whose capabilities exceeded normal categories. She'd fought for her life at 20,000 feet, not through flying the aircraft but through coordinating the complex crisis that kept injured pilots functional long enough to bring everyone home. She'd been recognized by military pilots who understood what her call sign represented, not just tactical excellence but the particular courage required to maintain professional competence while your own survival was threatened, to focus on mission success while fighting through conditions that challenged every physical and mental capability. The woman in 23C had been invisible until crisis demanded revelation, and now she carried her call sign openly again, accepting that some identities couldn't be set aside even when uniforms were exchanged for civilian clothes. Viper represented achievements that commanded respect because they'd been earned through impossible situations survived with precision and determination that defined what military aviation meant at its highest levels. She'd saved 200 people by being exactly who combat had made her, someone who could coordinate chaos, who could maintain tactical focus through crisis, who could provide the expertise that exceeded what civilian emergency procedures anticipated. And somehow, despite her exhaustion and her discomfort with recognition, she knew that if she found herself in Seat 23C again when crisis erupted, she'd make the same decision to reveal herself rather than let anonymity prevent her from helping people whose survival depended on capabilities she'd spent years earning through experiences she'd rather forget. The call sign followed her, heavy with meaning that transcended current circumstances, representing proven capabilities under fire that military professionals recognized instantly. She was Viper, and that identity had saved lives at 20,000 feet through expertise that combat had burned into her soul. She couldn't hide from what she was, and perhaps she'd finally stopped wanting to try. 3 weeks after the emergency landing, Rebecca found herself standing in a conference room at United Airlines headquarters, surrounded by senior pilots, airline executives, and FAA officials who'd requested her presence to review the incident and discuss implications for future emergency procedures. Captain Mitchell was there too, still moving carefully with her healing ribs but insistent on attending despite her doctor's recommendations for continued rest. "The issue we're confronting," the FAA's Chief of Flight Operations said, directing the presentation toward incident analysis displayed on screens around the room, "is that commercial aviation emergency procedures assume pilots remain functional throughout crisis situations. United 2847 demonstrated catastrophically what happens when that assumption fails." Captain Mitchell, First Officer Chen, both were injured severely enough that maintaining basic aircraft control consumed their entire capability. "Without Colonel Thornton's intervention, our analysis indicates complete loss of aircraft was probable within 4 to 6 minutes of when she entered the cockpit." Mitchell nodded slowly, her expression carrying the weight of someone who confronted her own mortality while responsible for 200 others. "I've flown for 18 years and I've trained for every emergency scenario the airline requires. But nothing prepared me for fighting to stay conscious while simultaneously managing an aircraft that was tearing itself apart. When Viper, stepped into that cockpit, it was like having a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. She took over everything except the actual flying, and that was the only reason I could maintain control long enough to reach the runway." "Your combat experience included similar situations?" an airline executive asked Rebecca, his tone carrying genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. Rebecca considered how to translate military experience into civilian context without revealing classified details. "In combat operations, aircraft damage and pilot injury occur simultaneously more often than peacetime flying anticipates. I've flown missions where my aircraft was hit by enemy fire while I was managing injuries, where maintaining flight operations required compartmentalizing pain and oxygen deprivation to focus on immediate tactical requirements. I've coordinated with wounded wingmen, guided damaged aircraft to emergency landings, and maintained mission focus through physical conditions that should have ended flight operations. The situation aboard United 2847 was severe, but the combination of injured pilots and catastrophic aircraft damage wasn't unfamiliar territory for someone with combat experience. The F-35 pilots who provided escort," the military liaison interjected, "reported that your tactical coordination was extraordinary. They said you managed multiple simultaneous crises with precision that exceeded standard commercial emergency protocols. Can you explain your decision-making process?" Rebecca pulled up the incident timeline on the conference room display, her hands moving across the controls with practiced efficiency. "When I assessed the situation in the cockpit, I saw 3 simultaneous crises competing for attention: the pilot's physical deterioration, the aircraft's cascading systems failures, and the coordination requirements for emergency landing. Standard commercial procedures assume pilots can handle all 3. But Captain Mitchell was fighting just to maintain consciousness and First Officer Chen was seriously concussed. They couldn't coordinate communications, manage secondary systems, and monitor damage assessment while also flying the aircraft. She highlighted specific moments in the timeline. My combat training emphasized task prioritization under extreme stress. I took over everything that didn't require direct hands-on flying: radio coordination, systems management, tactical assessment with the F-35 escort, emergency services coordination. This allowed Captain Mitchell to focus her diminishing physical capability exclusively on the one task only she could perform: keeping her hands on the controls. In military terminology, I became her weapons systems officer, handling everything except actually piloting so she could concentrate her remaining strength where it was absolutely essential. The F-35 escort was unprecedented for a civilian emergency, the FAA official noted. How did that coordination work? Fighter pilots understand combat damage assessment in ways that commercial aviation doesn't typically require, Rebecca explained. When Raptor Flight provided visual inspection of our structural damage, they could tell me exactly how compromised the aircraft was, what maneuvers were possible, what risks we faced. That tactical information allowed me to guide Captain Mitchell's approach decisions with data we couldn't obtain from inside the cockpit. The F-35 pilots also understood military communication protocols. When I used tactical terminology, they immediately grasped situation severity and coordination requirements without needing extensive explanation. Mitchell spoke up, her voice carrying emotion that professional composure couldn't entirely hide. The moment that saved us was when Rebecca told me to stop trying to manage everything and just focus on keeping the aircraft stable. She broke down an impossible task into one achievable goal. My hands on the controls, maintaining minimal stability, while she handled literally everything else. That tactical simplification gave me something I could accomplish even while my body was failing. Your call sign became significant during the emergency, an executive said carefully, clearly aware they were approaching sensitive territory. The F-35 pilot's reaction to hearing Viper seemed to change the dynamic of military support. Rebecca felt the familiar weight of that name settling around her shoulders. Call signs in military aviation aren't just nicknames, they represent proven capabilities under specific circumstances. Mine was earned during a combat engagement that became teaching material in fighter training schools. When the F-35 pilots recognized my call sign, they understood immediately that I had relevant combat experience and tactical expertise. Their response wasn't about celebrity, it was professional recognition that allowed them to trust my assessment and coordinate support at a level they might have questioned from an unknown civilian. Tell us about that engagement, the military liaison said quietly. If it's not classified, understanding what your call sign represents would help us contextualize why the military response was so exceptional. Rebecca hesitated, then decided the story was relevant to understanding what had happened aboard United 2847. During a combat mission in 2017, my wingman was hit by enemy fire and severely damaged. He was injured, his aircraft was barely controllable, and we were surrounded by hostile fighters. Standard procedure would have been for him to eject while I engaged the enemy and provided cover for his rescue. But ejection over that territory meant capture or death, the rescue window would have been too long. She continued, her voice carrying the flat emotional tone that covered memories she'd rather not revisit. I made a tactical decision to stay with him and fight our way out together. For 15 minutes I engaged 4 enemy fighters while simultaneously guiding my wounded wingman toward friendly territory, all while flying my own aircraft that had taken battle damage. The engagement analysis later determined I'd made 11 separate strikes that were described as Viper fast, striking with precision before enemy fighters could react, then withdrawing to protect my wingman before they could engage effectively. We both made it back. The call sign stuck because that engagement defined my tactical approach: fast, precise, lethal when necessary, but always focused on bringing everyone home. The room had gone quiet. Finally, Mitchell spoke. That's exactly what you did on United 2847. You struck fast with tactical decisions that kept us alive, you coordinated with precision that kept multiple crises from overwhelming us, and you focused everything on bringing everyone home. Your combat experience translated directly to saving 200 civilians. Which brings us to why we're here, the FAA official said. We need to develop procedures that account for pilot incapacitation during emergencies. Colonel Thornton, would you be willing to help design training protocols that incorporate military tactical approaches to civilian emergency management? Rebecca looked at the faces around the conference room, airline executives who wanted to prevent future disasters, FAA officials who needed to update regulations, pilots who understood how close United 2847 had come to catastrophic failure. She'd left active duty to escape the weight of life-and-death decisions, but crisis had found her anyway and proven that her expertise remained essential even in civilian contexts. "I'll help," she said finally. "But on one condition, the focus has to be on systematic improvements, not on celebrating individual heroism. What happened on United 2847 worked because I happened to be in the right place with the right experience. Next time, you might not be lucky. We need procedures that any trained person could implement, not protocols that require combat veterans to be coincidentally present during emergencies." The military liaison smiled slightly. "That's exactly the approach that made you an effective combat leader, Colonel. Focus on systematic excellence rather than individual capability. We'd expect nothing less from Viper." As the meeting continued into detailed discussions of emergency protocols and training requirements, Rebecca felt something shift inside her. She'd spent 6 months trying to leave Viper behind, trying to become someone whose past didn't define her present. But perhaps the call sign wasn't a burden to escape, perhaps it was simply who she was, earned through experiences that had prepared her for moments when expertise exceeded ordinary capabilities. She would never stop being Viper, because that identity represented proven capabilities under fire that couldn't be separated from who she'd become through years of combat and survival. The woman in seat 23C had been invisible only until crisis demanded revelation, and now she carried her call sign openly again, accepting that some identities persisted because they represented truths about capability and character that transcended circumstances. She'd fought for lives at 20,000 feet through tactical coordination that combined military expertise with civilian emergency management, proving that combat experience translated to saving people even outside warfare contexts. The F-35 pilots had recognized her call sign and responded with immediate respect because they understood what those 4 letters represented, not just past achievements but present capabilities that commanded trust even in unprecedented situations. Rebecca Thornton would continue her civilian life, but she would carry Viper with her openly now, accepting the weight and the honor of a call sign earned through impossible circumstances survived with precision and determination. She would help design better emergency procedures, would consult on tactical approaches to civilian crises, would use her combat expertise to make commercial aviation safer for people who would never know her name but might someday benefit from lessons learned at 20,000 feet when injured pilots and damaged aircraft had required someone whose experience exceeded normal boundaries. The call sign followed her still, but now she wore it consciously rather than hiding from it, understanding finally that Viper wasn't separate from who she was. It was the truest expression of capabilities earned through fire and proven through crisis when 200 lives depended on tactical expertise that combat had burned into her soul.